seconds of time. Your dial is now set to entering the mind. Presented by Riot Material. Your hosts and co-conspirators through life, C. Von Hassett and Rachel Reid Wilkie.
This idea that there is no subject, I, and there is no object, it or other, which of course is a construct of dualistic thinking, we aim in practice to experience the non-conceptual mind, and this mind in its natural state. When Eastern philosophers, and Dzogchen included, speaks to mind in its natural state, what exactly are we referring to?
Well, you're referring to a mind that you would actually really be familiar with because you've been seeing it your entire life. It's that mind that basically does nothing. It just kind of appears, say when you're a kid and you're laying in bed thinking about your day and you're kind of half drifting off to sleep, you recognize this mind that is basically empty, stable. It's doing nothing. You're familiar with it, but you don't pay any attention to it because it's doing nothing. And so we pay attention to all the activity that takes place in mind. With the training, you find that mind that is doing nothing is actually the entry point into the deeper self. And you recognize it by seeing that it has no beginning, it has no end, it's not going anywhere, no past or present, not a future.
This idea that there is no self, there is no I, leads us to understand that there is, however, an awareness. And this awareness is considered an I-less awareness, meaning awareness is awareness itself. And when we enter the mind and we experience this, we are aware of awareness experiencing itself. This is the heart of the Dzogchen practice.
Right. You could be meditating and be sitting in stillness, but when you begin to recognize that the awareness that you use to see the world is actually observing itself within, and this awareness is not necessarily connected to the body, because in practice you're looking at where is this I of the body and you don't find it, but what is doing the finding? And it is this awareness that is timeless, that is endless. And this is it.
Right.
When you begin to recognize this awareness that is beyond the body.
So I think most people are familiar with this concept of dualistic thinking, where there's the subject, which is I, and the object, which is it or other. And so what is actually happening at the point where duality gives way to the natural state?
It is in the recognizing of the awareness that sees itself. In that there is an absorption of the I, of the duality, because when you're observing this mind that we aim to recognize, that's a subject-object moment. One is observing the other. But when it begins to observe itself, you cross over. And it's not an immediate recognition of this, of duality collapsing, of the ego collapsing. It's just an observance that slips through, and you just more and more get to know this state at the more and more you practice, and you become more and more familiar with it, and then you recognize, there's this technique of recognizing the awareness that sees. There's a skill there in developing it. You slip more easily pass that line time and again.
Right. So this idea that mind sees mind, it is that which knows. So that, in essence, is the natural state
That's
of
it.
mind.
That's it. There's a knowing that recognizes the emptiness of self, and the emptiness of self is found by just, okay, where is this I in this body? Is it the body that's seeing the world outside, or is awareness seeing it? And is awareness bound to the body? And you begin to observe the body. You try to find the I in the body. You can't find it. There's practices that you employ to look for this I. And in recognizing that there is no actual, no inherent I in the body, what is it that's doing the seeing? And you recognize it's this awareness that's beyond the body, which means it's beyond time and space. No, it's not beyond space, it's beyond time. And this is kind of an awakening, because this thing is an undying awareness. It does not die, and you see this. There's training to get you to that point. All that training, the shamatha practice, everything you've done to get to the point of being stable enough to recognize the mind, that's critical. If you don't recognize the mind, then nothing after that makes any sense. It means nothing. Recognizing is important, and you need a lot of practice to get there, and you need stability. But once you have the stability and you're able to recognize it, now you rest in it, and it's relaxing in it. You're sitting in it. You're observing it. And in the observation, you're connecting more and more to the actual awareness that is seeing all of it. And now you're becoming one with this awareness, and the subject-object duality breaks down, it dissolves. And before you know it, sometimes you just slip right into it. You're resting in the natural state.
Yes. So this advanced stage of practice is not one of intellect nor analysis at this point. It is an experience where non-conceptual insight informs our experience.
Just resting there means you're wide open to receiving knowledge. And this knowledge is bubbling up from within yourself. And it's enlightening you to your own essence.
And when you say knowledge, you're referring to wisdom.
Yes, it's not an intellectual knowledge. It's the knowledge of knowing that you're a timeless being. It's in seeing this. It's in seeing that the body begins to float within your awareness, and it's floating in your awareness because you recognize that it's not substantial. Through your, what they call shad practice, you're breaking down each part of your body, you're analyzing each part of the body, the feet, the hands, the face, the heart, all of it to find the true substance of those parts, and you find that they're empty, because when you look at them, they go right back down to zero, to the atoms and space itself. And you begin to recognize that space is what is the body of your awareness, not your body.
Right. So speaking to that space, ultimately speaking, space defines who we are. We are, from a biological perspective, we know that we are more space than physical matter.
Yes.
The body itself, the human body that is made up of 99.99% space. You could refer to that as empty space. So emptiness is through and through. It's through our experience in our human body. It's, of course, in our experience of the universe. And ancient civilizations have known this through wisdom, insight. So what is it that we have now learned in modern science, in particular, well, from a biological perspective, but also from a quantum physics perspective? What have we learned today that now points to that same wisdom knowledge of the fact that we exist within and without of 99.99% space?
Yeah. Quantum physics will look at the body, and they'll just go right down past all the flesh into the cells, deep into the cells, and they see that within the cells, within the atoms, all the way down into the proton, but to below the proton to the Planck, is just a huge amount of space. And the same amount of space you see when looking up at the night sky and seeing the star system. it's kind of that kind of space within your own body. And so when you know this, and you can look at YouTube videos and see, the real time visuals of this, but when you bring it into your practice, you begin to recognize that it's not the body itself that's holding on to your consciousness. It's the space that's supportive of your consciousness.
Let's talk to this idea of the plonk, which is basically the smallest entity, because it's not really matter. It's the smallest entity that quantum physics have been able to quantify. The plonk oscillates at an incredible speed to create energy, pure energy, at this quantum physics level. And this energy is referred to as the unified field, the same field that transcendental meditation speaks directly to.
Yeah.
And we are all connected to this unified field because we are and we share that same emptiness, but it's an emptiness which is full of energy.
Yes.
So this energy that we experience, is that consciousness itself?
Well, I would guess it is. I mean, my interpretation of it is, there's energy there, and that energy is potent. They say that you could just grab a small couple spoonfuls of space in front of you, and the energy in that space can liquidate the oceans on the planet. This is the energy that, people say is being used by extraterrestrials to, fuel their way through the universe. To open up the universe and pull them through the universe. So the energy in the field is there, and I would have to imagine that this is the very energy that animates our awareness, our consciousness, and it is a field for all sentient consciousness that we all use, and yet we all have our individual perspectives on that field.
So just to really help define the enormity of space, because I think most of us are fully aware of the fact that the space within the universe is enormous. It's actually infinite. It's continually expanding at exponential rates. And so this space, to understand the fact that there is that same level of space in our bodies, we need to kind of look to this idea of fractal expansion or fractal contraction. So we've got this concept of micro to macro or macro to micro. And we know that if we were to look at the human body and all of its atoms and protons and nucleuses and plonks that make up the human body, if we were to actually remove the space from that human body, the matter of our human body would equate to merely a speck of dust.
And you don't even look at removing the space of the human body. You go right down into the cell and then looking at the atoms of the cell and just removing the space between the proton and the atom shell. There are 100 trillion atoms in every cell. There are 100 trillion cells in the body. Just remove the space between the proton and the atom shell and you lose everything in the body. The entire body collapses, as you say, to a speck of dust.
So what remains is 0.01% matter.
Right.
Right.
Which is just dust in the wind.
So when we refer to ourselves as being stardust beings, there is an absolute correlation between this space within us and the space between, for example, the Earth and the nearest star system.
Yeah, it's that proportional. What's going on in your body is directly proportional because the universe is not, it doesn't just randomly do things. The universe is working, as you say, fractally. So what's happening out there that we see very clearly, we don't get confused by looking up at the stars in the sky and say, oh my God, that's impossible, all that space. We accept it. Mm-hmm. We see that that's how it is. And that's how it is at every level. Mm-hmm. So that's the way we are too. We're just a conglomeration of bits that come together as what we perceive to be ourself. And then we falsely attach this solid sense of an I to this body. But in the end, the body is empty, and it's literally empty. It's empty right down to the proton, right down to the Planck level.
Right. And so this is the emptiness within our bodies that is the home of consciousness.
Yes. Now, the body gravitationally grounds the consciousness because that's just how we're, as conceptual beings, we need a body. We're always seeking a body. When we die from this body, we're going to be seeking another body. When we go to sleep at night, we seek the body in the dream. There's a perspective in dream that comes from a kind of body. This is what conceptual mind naturally does. To pull out of that, to awaken from this, you have to begin to recognize that the I doesn't exist, that what exists is awareness. And this is the awareness we begin to observe in our meditation practice.
So effectively, when we are looking for the self in all that emptiness, when consciousness is deluded, it grabs onto clusters.
Yes.
Just like we would grab onto the Milky Way as a cluster of star systems.
We call it the Milky Way as if it's an entity out there.
Right.
A
not.
singular
Exactly.
entity. It really isn't. And, it's easy for people to look up the Milky Way and you go, oh, that's the Milky Way. And you go, but, it's really not. It really is a bunch of stars. Well, I know that, of course. I'm just saying it's the Milky Way. But when you say, now let's do that with your own body, it's impossible. No, I don't buy into that concept at all.
Yes.
So it's a difficult argument to sell, but in truth, that's, just forget about meditation. Go to the quantum realm and they'll tell you.
Yes. So to speak to some practices that specifically train us mentally into dissembling this delusion piece by piece, effectively demolishing what holds us together as a solid entity, that which is an idea, and removing this concept of identity, and that is called chod. Speak a little bit to that, because I find that not only gruesome, but quite mystically fantastic.
Yeah. In your mind, you're literally disassembling your body. You're pulling, cutting off a hand, cutting off a foot. And what you're looking for is the I. You're looking for, is my I there? If you are your body, I am this guy. And I strongly believe that. So where is this I in the body? If it's in the body, it has to be in all the body. You can't just selectively say, oh, my I is in my brain, or it's in my heart, but it's nowhere else. The body either contains the I or it doesn't. And so you look for it in every part. You look for it in the hand. You cut off the hand in your mind's eye. You cut off the hand and you start peeling it apart, and you're looking for the eye, but you're also looking for the hand, and you realize that there is no hand there because you have skin, you have fingers, you have fingernails, you have blood, you have bones, and none of these are the hand, and none of them will contain the I either. And so you continue in the practice of looking at all the parts of your body until you ultimately come to the realization that the I does not belong there. Now this is a short-lived realization because the habitual I continues to return, which is why you do it again and again and again. And the more you do it, and especially while you're doing it while you're sitting in meditation, you're also connecting to this awareness that is aware of itself, and the two begin to speak to each other. And the power of the I begins to diminish because the realization of awareness begins to take precedence.
So you ultimately surrender to the knowledge that there is no I, neither in this body nor anywhere, actually.
The I is a concept, and it's a powerful concept. It comes to us right at the beginning, right at birth. Pre-birth, we've been having this I problem for ever. And we're here lucky enough now to receive some sort of teachings to say, hey, guys, that I is a problem for you. It's not really real. Most traditions on the planet do not tell us this. Most traditions tell us to give our I over to the higher power, to the higher being, to some entity out there. And the beauty of Dzogchen and Buddhism is saying, no, look within, and you're going to find out that there's no I there. Doesn't mean that you're not there. You are an entity that exists. There is a presence within you, and there's a perspective within you, but it isn't as you perceive it to be. And so the training is to break down the false perception and to align yourself with the higher, more realized perception of self.
Right. So the recognition or the acceptance of the absence of I is actually that of a positive perspective on life.
Yes, it's an affirmation of your higher self, this truly existent self, which is awareness, and this awareness is one with the emptiness of the universe, which is space. And it's timeless. So this awareness never dies. When you look at this awareness, that you begin to recognize, oh, I remember that all the way back into my childhood. It hasn't changed one bit, and it will never change. But what changes is that I that's kind of animated within that awareness, that's continually changing, and that's why we're so frustrated, and we fall in love, we fall out of love, people change before our eyes, and we don't understand why. This is a natural change of the ever-changing I. Mm-hmm. But the awareness that perceives that I never changes.
Mm-hmm. And I know that, from reading the great masters, they all remind us that this isn't a nihilistic approach to life. This isn't where we say, well, nothing really matters in this life because nothing's real, nothing's solid, everything's made of space, there is no I, there is no you, therefore none of this exists. Actually, the opposite, that we still have been honored with a human life, and we are an expression of this consciousness, and so we must cultivate a certain level of conduct within this three-dimensional realm where we respect ourselves, we respect others, we respect the fact that there is a three-dimensional reality that we are moving through and experiencing, at the same time welcoming that it is our consciousness that is experiencing this three-dimensional realm. So we do have the conceptual mind does have to actually grasp this full perspective.
Yes. I mean, in the long and never-ending arc of our existence, we have arrived here. That is just the way it is. And we have to absolutely honor where we've arrived. And we've arrived in this body. But to say that it's all false, it's all nothing, you could argue that that's true, but what's false is our perception of the things in our universe. What's false is how we perceive it, including ourselves. To say that nothing exists, that's a very lazy approach, because what is it that is saying that? What is the awareness that is acknowledged it? That awareness does exist. So that's critical. You have to become aware of the awareness that's starting to negate things, because there's an affirmation at the beginning of the negation, and that affirmation is the very existence of awareness.
So this idea of affirmation and negation, that leads us to how the conceptual mind creates labels and stories and constructs about this I, mm-hmm. that effectively is not a solid I. And so in this modern era, especially in the Western civilizations, we have been brought up to define our I, to become our I, and to, of course, tell those stories, label our experiences, and express those proudly so to the exterior world. I mean, now, of course, with social media, we have all sorts of means to focus on the I and elaborate on the I and adorn the I and continue to reaffirm these stories that we are conceptually creating about our I. How is this influencing us as a society, as a Western civilization? How are we experiencing this over-obsessive focus on the I?
Well, again, you could begin with space. Space allows for everything. So without space, you would have nothing. But space is here. We see it around us. So space allows for things to arise. Within that space, we have an awareness. And within our awareness arises thought. Thought is kind of a substance of sorts. It arises within our awareness. And from the non-conceptual state, the thought will arise in awareness like a bird flies through the sky. Nothing happens. But in our conceptual state, the thought arises, and within every thought, there is embedded an I that's perceiving the thought. So there's already the duality of the thought arising. So these subtler and subtler forms give rise to more substance as you move up the scale. So from space, you get the awareness, and from awareness, you get the I, and then you get the thought, because the I is thinking about other things, and from the thought, you get manifest matter. Basically, the thought wants to create things. And so then you have the world that, we build things and things exist. And then now, as you say, we have social media, and we have this universe on the web, and people are even further projecting their I outward beyond their body now onto social media, the platform. They're creating this, perfect curated I, and they take on avatars and they move their I into that. But what they're losing with each step is their own connection to their own awareness being.
Mm-hmm. So with this over-defining of I that we all actually participate in some way or another, how does this negatively influence our state of being? For example, we have rising numbers of depression. We have rising numbers of addiction. We have an incredible increase in violence, whether it's verbal or physical. And may I say, we have aggressors who are embarking on fully fledged wars.
Yeah. It's a complicated question, and I don't know if I really have a good answer, because the truth is, the further and further you pull away from your own awareness, and the more you connect with the I, and this I is obviously impermanent. It's always changing, and so it creates sadness because you've just lost something dear to you. You get depressed, and all of these things that you're projecting outward towards these things that we wish to have and wish to own or want to run away from. And really the answer to all of those maladies lies within returning inward and kind of dispensing with all these exterior things, respecting them and appreciating that they do exist around us. That's the reality. We have this body, and outside of our body are all these things. But the more you return within the body, into the awareness, the less any of that affects or even infects your presence in the world. It's like the arrows get shot at you and they don't land because they move right through an awareness presence rather than a solid physical presence that's projecting in every direction.
Right. There's one thing that David Lynch has said a number of times in some of his interviews, which I love, is that through meditation, we could possibly attain world peace if enough people meditated. And I see why that is. I see why that is because meditation trains you to not affiliate with your labels, with your stories, with your sense of I. It trains you to not see other people as others. So it removes this idea, this construct of subject and object. And over time, you're able to discern the fact that we are all interconnected and we are all at one with this consciousness. And so practice ultimately leads to a sense of self-liberation. And this self-liberation is from pain and suffering, both mental and physical.
Yes.
And so I do believe that if you no longer associate yourself with a certain country or a certain nationality, of a certain creed, of a certain ethnicity, you then don't define yourself separate from anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it's separation that leads to war.
Yeah. Yeah, the more you identify with your body, the more you need to defend it, the more you need to explain it, the more you need to change it so it aligns with cultural mores. So these things create, frictions, and, this is where the trouble begins. When you're looking outward and you lose the things that you love, you get sad. When you think people are trying to challenge you, you get angry. But when you move inward, as Lynch is saying, there's none of that going on, because what's in there is love, it's compassion, it's joy. These are the natural energies of our natural state. And so what you're doing is returning back into those natural energies, which are just absolutely lovely. You want to connect with them, and yet we're trained, and our habit leads us continually outward towards the things that we ultimately lose.
Right. I mean, that's not to say that we shouldn't believe and stand up for human rights and
Totally.
equality of rights.
I think that's important.
Back to the discussion that we are living in a three-dimensional world, and we are here as a community to support each other and to fight for each other, for want of a better word.
Well, when it's coming out of a place of compassion, you want to see people, if injustice is happening, you need to step in and address it. And if that's coming from a place of love and compassion and wanting the best for everybody, that's a noble stance.
Right.
But if you're doing it aggressively to take something from somebody else, there's a problem there, obviously.
Right. There really is nothing other than meditation that can free us from dualistic thinking. Dualistic thinking is part of our existence here as human beings on this planet. And especially coming from a Western civilization, we have no education in this. We're actually taught to think. We're taught to act on our thoughts. We're taught that thinking is revered, that thinking is the pinnacle of our society, that those who are intellectual, those who have a certain level of intellect are above others, as it were. And so our whole civilization is training us to think and think more. And yet we aren't taught meditation, not in our scholastic educational system. Meditation really is the only way to break down and dissolve dualistic thinking. And it does that through practice, because it does that through your own experience of that dissolution. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that meditation could and should be introduced all across the world to every child who enters any kind of educational system, because I really believe that this practice is the only practice that can return us as a species back to the essence of who we are.
Well, I totally agree, and you brought up Lynch earlier, and Lynch is actually bringing meditation to schools. I think the LA Unified School District, amongst many others now, are employing transcendental meditation as part of the curriculum to, get these students to calm down, to look within, and it is the only way to set us back on course as a species. But I don't think we should negate the intellect, because the intellect allows us to even grasp the concepts that we're trying to settle into in meditation. You look at the Tibetans, and they're put into the monastery from a very young age, and they're rigorously schooled through hundreds and hundreds of texts and reciting and memorizing and knowing. But what they're doing is they're kind of like recalibrating the intellect so it's ready to turn inward.
Right.
And so when they do begin that process of going, it's a kind of a simultaneous process, but when they do actually go in deep, they don't go in with any kind of confusion. They kind of have an intellectual understanding of where they're ready to arrive at. And when they do arrive there, they go, aha, that's what they've been telling me all along. I get it.
Right.
I'm seeing it now. Now I just need to rest here and just relax into what I've been so well trained in all these years.
Right.
So the intellect is great. We've been, I don't want to say misusing, because there's so much beauty that comes out of the intellect. I mean, you look at the 20th century writers and the artists, and they're employing their intellect along with their creativity. It's kind of a beautiful union. And that's kind of what we're doing with meditation as well. We're at the union of intellect with the creative process of going deep into ourselves and arriving into a sphere that is unspeakable. You cannot speak to it. There's no language to it. This book that I've written, it's just words. They're words that the attempt is to guide, but in the end, it's your process. You have to go in. And when you enter, there's nothing to say. There's nothing to say. You just sit there and observe and watch. And the knowledge that comes, it's beyond intellect. It just arises up in your awareness being. And that knowledge informs the conceptual being that we are in this world, until at some point the awareness being takes over. And you see this with several masters in the world today. These guys are clearly in front of us. They're in the flesh, and yet there's something about them that's just unbelievably clean, pure, because they're inhabiting their awareness being that they trained in, and they began as a child with their intellect. But it just shifts over time into this unspeakable presence, and it's beautiful.
Entering the Mind by Sivon Hassett is available at enteringthemind.com.